Hello. Today we're going to be talking about the Emilcin abduction or the Jan Wolski case. And this is a case that actually involves real little green men. You hear little green men joked about a lot, but this case involves real little green men. And it's perhaps inaccurate to call it an abduction since he wasn't actually taken. He encountered these beings and entered the craft on his own volition and then left. In this case, it took place in Emilcin. Let's see, how do we... Okay, there we go. In Emilcin, Poland. Oh, and I want to apologize in advance. This is a Polish case, and so a lot of the literature is in Polish, and I only had access to the material that I could get in English or that I could translate, and I also don't speak Polish, so I apologize in advance for butchering the names here. It's kind of a difficult language, I think, in my opinion. But Emilcin was basically, it's a small town or a village. It had about 72 farms in Poland. It was in the Opolu-Lubelski commune area of Poland. It was so small, it didn't have, there was no newsstands. There was only one shop in this village. There was no pubs or clubs or like restaurants to eat at. In fact, the whole town apparently only had 2 televisions and a couple of radios. And so that's the kind of the context of that area in Emilcin. This is a kind of a map of the area to keep in mind as I explain the case to you. This guy was basically walking through this meadow here when he ended up encountering these beings, and this meadow is sort of near his house. But let's kind of just get on to the case here. And I want to thank, I took a comic here that was created by a famous Polish artist, Grzegorz Szwedzinski, called Prisbiz. And I took all the Polish language and I took it out and I translated it and I tried to fix things as best as I could. But like I said, I don't speak Polish, so I fixed the stuff that Google Translate that was obviously incorrect. I didn't bother to change any like grammar or tense errors or things like that. So I apologize, but the comic is legible and it's in English now. So that's where these illustrations come from, if you're wondering. So it's early May 10th, 1978, and Jan Wolski, who's a 71-year-old farmer, is returning home to the village of Emilcin from Debunking with his horse-drawn cart. He decides to cut through the field on his property in order that he might get back to his cottage sooner. And there's one other thing I want to point out about this case is there's a lot of conflicting information. I mean, an amazing amount of conflicting information on this case. The details I'm sharing with you are generally the right structure that they all share, but when it comes to the specific details, there's a lot of variation in why things happened. A different source reports that the reason that he was cutting through the field was actually because this mare did not have the right type of shoe to travel on the hard road surface, and so that's why he was cutting through this field. And there's a lot of discrepancies like this depending on the sources. In fact, almost every source has completely different information. So keep that in mind. So he's riding through this village and cutting through this field that's near his property. He was originally on this road, like I said, that was a road from Debunking to Lublin, between Lublin and Opolu-Lubelski. And he turned off this road onto this kind of like narrow kind of dirt path that cut through these trees near his property. And as he's riding along this path with these mares through these trees and brushes, he notices these 2 people walking in front of him. And at first he thinks that there must be hunters from like a nearby camp. And these beings, they were kind of walking, he said, in a way that kind of resembled like supple jumps, like divers, kind of like an open ocean floor, or perhaps like you might imagine an astronauts like on the moon. This kind of like fluent, kind of like smooth jumping motion is the way these beings or entities were walking. As he got near them, they each stepped kind of to one side of his cart and then jumped into his cart as he passed, sitting behind him, which apparently is, a fairly common thing to do in the country, to catch a ride on someone's cart. Wolski is not frightened, and so he turns around slightly to face them, and he notices these two short, green-faced, black-eyed humanoid entities, about 5 feet tall, are sitting there. At first, he mistakes them for foreigners because of their slanted eyes and prominent cheekbones. In fact, he thought they were sort of like the Chinese. But they were different because they had this green skin. They also had this hump on their neck that he's just kind of like you rolled up like a towel and put it kind of around the neck. They had this hump or a lump there. They also report they had a web-like fin between their fingers up to the first joint, amphibian-like. However, I will point out that that may, in fact, be a false detail because, as we've seen in cases like Socorro, they actually inserted bogus details into this case in order to determine if there was copycats or people that were making up stories later on. And apparently one of these bogus details was the fin-like structure between the fingers. Another detail that you'll see in some of the illustrations was like a circular kind of a shape emblem on the chest or breast area of the creatures. Apparently those are made up in order to pull people off. But some of the sources do report this web-like, this pattern, and the comic reports it, but again, the comic gets kind of a lot of details wrong as well. But overall, they were these short, 5 feet tall creatures. They had this green-like skin, and they were wearing this tight-fitting black suit that covered them from the head to the toe. Kind of like a diver suit, but apparently Wolski wasn't really aware of what a diver suit was. Wolski was he was pretty uneducated. He only went to a couple of years of primary school when he was a child. So he didn't go through a whole lot of school. He had almost never left this village. He had went on a vacation once around World War II. He went to Ukraine, I guess. But he was a pretty isolated guy, and he was not a very educated guy. And like I said, he didn't get a lot of like news or media. And so he wasn't supposedly familiar with what a diver suit was. Now, these entities are kind of speaking to each other in a fast-paced voice that he could not understand. It sounded kind of like a ta-ta-ta-ta-ta-ta. And he said it was so fast that he couldn't really understand how they could be communicating with each other, how they could understand each other, because it was almost just kind of like a stutter, almost like a blur of speaking. And so anyway, so these entities are kind of behind him, and they're sitting behind him, and they're facing kind of away, the legs kind of hanging off the side of the craft. And they continue down this path with his mare until they reach this clearing ahead. Now, when Wolski reaches this clearing, he's surprised to find this large kind of white object, kind of cuboid object, hovering about 16 feet up into the air. It's about 15 to 16 feet high and about as long as a bus, but he says it's like a short bus, not like the long buses we have now, but like a short bus. And on this craft, there's these four cylindrical or barrel-shaped objects in the corners that contain these large screw thread-like rotating poles that are moving very fast. They're generating a humming sound resembling that of a transformer, or he says a swarm of bees. And apparently, when these poles are hovering or spinning around, kind of like a drill bit, they give off some kind of like coloring, some strange effervescent kind of coloring around them. When they're about 20 meters from the object, or rather about 60 feet of the object, one of the entities indicates for him to stop the cart. Now, keep in mind they can't communicate verbally, like they can't understand each other. So everything like the Simonton case and many other cases is indicated basically with hand gestures. And so when they're about 60 feet away from this object, one of these entities tells him to stop the cart. And apparently his mare has quite kind of like the attitude and doesn't like to stop unless it wants to stop. And so apparently one of these entities grabs the reins and helps him stop the mare so they can stop the cart. Wolski then secures the mare and follows the beans up to this craft. Now, a platform descends to the ground from the object, and they indicate for Wolski to get on the platform. Now, depending on the sources, the platform is either already on the ground when they got there, or it descended to the ground when they walked up to approach it. And there's also conflicting detail about as far as who got on the platform here. Some of the sources say Wolski got on the platform and one of the beings got on the platform. The other turned back around to check out his mare and to investigate it. Other sources say they both got on the platform. So like I said, it's different details depending on the source here. But so he gets on this platform and he's lifted up into the craft in an instant with one of these beings, which is most of the sources agree it was one being that went up on the craft with him on that platform. And this platform is basically, it looks like it's just like a plank that is lifted up on these wires. It's just a simple lift. When he gets to the top, which he says happened in an instant, almost like it didn't even remember it happening. He said it was just so quick, like it was at the bottom and he was at the top. And when he gets to the top there, he steps into the craft through the small doorway. He immediately notices there are two more entities inside the craft that look just like the entities he met on the ground, holding these two small bulb-like objects. The room is dark. There are no lights or windows in the craft, only the daylight that comes through the door. The interior wall is black with a grayish tint, similar to that of the creature's outfits, with an almost plastic or bakelite appearance to it. The only objects are about 8 to 10 benches situated around the craft. These benches are held up by these kind of wires, just like the lift was, and they appear to be big enough to sit about one person each. The doorway was very strange. It didn't have any hinges like you would expect on a door. Instead, it rolled up like a piece of carpet would. One of the entities that came in with him indicated for Wolski to strip his clothes. He starts to remove his jacket, his sweater, his shirt, until he has removed the top half of his clothing. He thought that would be enough, but they indicated for him to strip everything off. Wolski is then examined with a tool that resembles the two dishes or saucers. This tool makes a soft vibrating or buzzing sound as he is thoroughly checked out. And he explains that he thinks it's kind of almost like maybe it's a camera or something that's taking images or snapshots of him as they inspect him. Now, while they're examining Wolski, the entities start to eat something that looks kind of like icicles, like an icicle that might be hanging off your roof, but it's soft, kind of like cake. They're able to break it off, easily and smoothly. And they offer him a piece of it, but he refuses. So after finishing the examination, they then instruct Wolski to get dressed. The beings find his belt particularly fascinating, playing with the buckle mechanism, perhaps curious about its function. They buckle it and rebuckle it and unbuckle it repeatedly, which is kind of interesting. Sorry, I lost my place there. And as he's about to leave, he notices on the ground near where he came in, there's some rooks, which are they're ravens or crows. I guess they're called rooks in like that part of Poland and in various other places. And in front of this door. And one of these rooks seems to be moving its legs and wings, but it seems to be immobilized, like it can't really move or fly. And there's 8 to 10 or a dozen or something of these like immobilized birds just kind of there on the ground. And on the wall next to the immobilized birds are these two holes. One of these beings is holding a small band in his hand. And this tool is basically like a stick, and he says it looks kind of like a raspberry head on the end or like a ball on the end. And he sticks this tool into the holes and turns it as if he's making an adjustment. He does it in the one hole, then he does it in the other hole. And that's all we kind of hear about that. I don't know what the adjustment was supposed to be, but it's really, those two holes and those benches are the only things in that entire craft. Supposedly there's like a kind of a conduit that looks like it kind of goes along the ceiling. But aside from that, there's no instrumentation, there's no panels, there's no like control system, there's nothing to indicate like it was any sort of kind of machinery. It was like an empty room with the seat, basically. Now Wolski is dressed, and they indicate that he can leave. As he returns to the lift, he turns around and bows to the entities, wishing them goodbye. Because apparently, like I said, he wasn't afraid this whole time, and he thought these were, they were nice, they treated him well. And so he wanted to be polite and wish them goodbye. I have to say, personally, I'm not sure where he gets off thinking they treated them well. This guy met some strange creatures. They made him come into his craft and get naked. and then sent him on his way. If that's treating you well, I don't know. But anyways, so he thought they were these very nice, pleasant beings, and so he wanted to wish them goodbye, and so he did. They mimic his motions and return with his bow with a smile or kind of like a grimace. He goes on this lift, and again, just like when he got on the lift, he was down at the bottom in almost an instant. Some reports say it didn't quite go all the way to the bottom. He had to jump off the lift to get to the rest of the ground. But he's back on the ground, and he's walking back over to his horse or his mare. At this point, he estimates he's been in the craft about 10 minutes based on the amount of grass the mare has eaten. Wolski is anxious to return home to his family and kind of tell them the story, to notify them what happened, and urging them to see if perhaps they could get out and see the floating craft himself before they left. Now, his sons, I'll point out this event I mentioned happened in the morning. Supposedly it happened around, he first saw these creatures about 7:20, 7:15, 7:20 in the morning. And they say he got back home at around a quarter till 8. Some reports say 8. And again, this is where these details vary. There's other reports that say he didn't get home until 10:30, and another about an alarm clock he saw that said it was 12:30. So depending on the sources, this incident happened anywhere between 10 minutes and like 3.5 hours or more. So most of them have it being a fairly short encounter, and Wolski himself in 1985 would say it was only about 10 to 15 minutes on the craft. I guess if you take the time with when he first saw these beings, maybe add another 5-10 minutes. So he gets back, and his sons call on some of the neighbors, and together they decide to go investigate the site. The grass where the craft had been hovering had shown signs of usage, being trodden down and covered with dew and past coming in all directions. Wolski returns home, leaving the rest of his neighbors and family at the site. Wolski's sons claimed they would also find footprints left by the beings, but could not describe them in much detail. Now, whether these this trodden down paths in the grass were from these beings or from visitors and the village people visiting the site, that'll be something you'll have to decide. Either way, there wasn't much they could do with the trace cases. Like I said, it was a heavily visited site. At one point, there was supposedly up to 14 busloads of people visiting the site in the time after the incident. Later, a 6-year-old boy from the village would claim also to have witnessed a bus-like craft with green-faced occupants hover over a barn at about the same time, at about 8:10 in the morning, before it would climb into the sky and vanish. And that's actually a photo of the boy in one of the television documentaries. This incident caused a lot of commotion in the local village. The local town's people, particularly the children, apparently got quite scared. Like I said, this is a small village, and the children, it sounds cliche, but literally had to walk 2 kilometers through the forest in order to get to school every morning. And so apparently these children became quite concerned that maybe they would be abducted by these UFO occupants. And so the local headmaster for the school and this physics teacher they had there decided to try to teach kind of some critical thinking to the students, just kind of calm them down and kind of put a lid on this. And they also kind of spent some time teaching them about space sciences and life in the universe, and that we haven't really discovered it yet. And I guess they spent a lot of time kind of praising the Soviet space developments of the time as well. But apparently it was ineffective, and there were still students skipping school. So the headmaster of this school decided to inform the local militia. And so he called in the local militia to the village in order to investigate the case, hoping that they would be able to just explain it away as like a helicopter or something natural, and that would be the end of that. And so they come into the village and they investigate, but they find no evidence to actually back up Wolski's extraordinary tale. The police determined that he probably dreamt the whole scenario up in his sleep in sort of like a waking dream. And if you recall, the Joe Simonton pancake case I spoke about a couple months ago, it basically had the very similar explanation, that it was essentially a waking dream that this guy kind of integrated into his reality and confused for being real. Now, Wolski, of course, would claim that was not possible because he was wide awake at the time. Apparently, he had been escorting somebody who was new and unfamiliar to the village shortly before this incident happened. And because of his company, he was on constant alert and paying attention to his surroundings. The comic says that, again, I cannot confirm any other sources that mention this person he was supposedly escorting. But again, the main books on the case are in Polish, and I don't have them. So maybe they discuss it in there. And Wolski, again, they also say he didn't drink alcohol. They say he was a teetotaler. He didn't drink, and that he was a very honest man that would not make up such a story, that he was a God-fearing Catholic, and that made it impossible that he would produce a story like this. Also, the fact that, again, this is a Soviet-controlled Poland at the time, and reporting a fake story or a lie to waste the malicious time may not be a good idea. Okay. Still, it's hard to determine what the exact nature of Wolski's story is. The main actors in this case have already passed away, and they've been dead for quite a while now. If you recall, Wolski was 71 when this event happened in 1978. He would pass away in 1991. Zbigniew Bolnar died in 2003. There have been multiple explanations offered for this case. However, one of them, of course, I already mentioned, was perhaps that was a helicopter. The local, police or the Soviets were doing some sort of exercise, the militia was, and he confused the incident for a helicopter. Some say Wolski himself was an avid storyteller, and that he enjoyed the attention that came with his UFO story, that he would give people tours around the site where he allegedly encountered these beings and their craft, which is, it's interesting because, again, there's also contradictory information on this, conflicting information that states that it annoyed him having to kind of do this, that his grounds were being trampled by all these visitors, and that he wished he hadn't told this story. But I would have to say, based on his actions, that's just not true. He seemed very interested in telling this story to anyone that wanted to hear it when he was still alive, and he, would speak at UFO conferences, and he did not live the life of a person that felt like he didn't want to tell this story and he wished he hadn't told this story. So take from that kind of what you will. Others claim, in fact, that he had been drugged and hallucinated this entire incident. In an alternate version of this story, the entire affair was actually kind of a scripted plot by the communist regime to divert public attention away from the economy at the time, which I guess was in the dumps. And given the widespread news coverage at the time and the fact that the Soviet media was not independent, it was government controlled, one could make an argument that there was some reason why they chose to give this story so much publicity and attention at the time. In fact, it was really the first major UFO story that kind of hit the news in Poland. And it was a fairly unique situation in the Soviet Union in general, that Poland kind of was allowed to have this kind of open ufological community publishing and talking about this research, where I guess it was more kind of restricted and not talked about in other countries in the Union. And so one of these theories was that the communist regime did it in order to kind of divert people's attention away. And it did become a major story in Poland that everyone was talking about. But again, there's also no proof for any of these hypotheses that it was a scripted plot by the regime, that he was drugged, that it was an hallucination. Another theory is offered by Polish author and researcher Bartosz Ardatowski. For him, the whole Emilcin affair originates as a prank one ufologist tried to pull on another. Ardatowski purchased the Zbigniew Blania's archives from the ufologist's sister after he died in 2003. He went through his files in order to see if he could get to the bottom of this case. In 2013, he published a book, Tajne Operacje Pirali UFO, otherwise known as Secret Operations, the Polish People's Republic, and UFOs. And in this book, he outlines his prank hypothesis. Now, Zbigniew Blania Bolnar was a Lodz ufologist and sociologist that was with the University of Lodz. And he highly publicized the Emilcin case in Poland. He went to Emilcin not long after the incident took place in order to conduct an investigation that on the surface appeared to be quite professional and thorough and quite scientific. He invited a psychologist and a psychiatrist to perform tests on the lead witness and determined he was of a sane mind and good mental health. There was a variety of different tests they gave him, like these apperception tests and various other tests. And in each case, they determined he didn't really have this fantasy-prone personality. He wasn't prone to lying or making up stories, and that he, wasn't kind of deranged or mentally unwell. By all accounts, he was in good mental condition. They also subjected him to a number of medical tests. And Blania took this whole incident quite seriously. He described the results of the investigation in 2 books. One of these books, Zjarzniew Emilcinia, Event in Emilcin, was probably the bigger book. I believe that came out perhaps in 1996. But for years, Blania didn't say how he found out about this incident in Emilcin. It was only in the book in 1996 that he actually mentions he learned about it from another Lublin ufologist, Witold Verjanek. Witold Verjanek learned about Wolski's encounter shortly after it happened from a coworker. Some claim that Witold actually knew Wolski's son beforehand, and Ardatowski says he spoke with Verjanek's wife, and that she did actually confirm this. But there's kind of a lot of dispute when it comes to this Verjanek guy. Verjanek had actually already spoken to Wolski and learned the details of the case, and recorded a kind of an interview with him, and he informed Blania of the story in a telegram on March 28th. This telegram is from March 30th, roughly 20 days after the incident. Verjanek had this habit of using hoaxes to kind of like make a point in UFO circles. 6 months earlier, he had produced fake UFO photographs that he had sent into a Polish television show, Sonda. They then forwarded these photos on to Blania, which is the local kind of the main UFO expert at the time. He was basically the Stanton Friedman of Poland. So they forwarded them on to him for consultation, and Blania and Verjanek stayed in touch from that kind of point on. About a month or two before the Emilcin incident, the 2 gentlemen had made a bet on a television program that Blania had invited Verjanek to appear on. With the hypnotist Lech Stefanski. Blania said that he would have Verjanek hypnotized in order to implant false memories of a UFO event that never took place. And Verjanek was confident that it couldn't happen, that it would be impossible to implant these memories into him. After a session during which Stefanski was successfully able to put Verjanek in a trance-like state, the Lublin ufologist did, in fact, wake up remembering those implanted false memories. Not feeling very happy about being made a fool of, he decided he wanted to get back at Blania. He was so furious after his death, in fact, that his son, Adam Verjanek, tried to stop this story from being told by Ardatowski. He felt that it was the greatest shame to his father's honor, and that he had felt humiliated and hated Blania his entire life because of that experiment. I'll point out, from what I've read, actually, that television episode never aired. So while it did happen and he was hypnotized, it was never publicly aired or shown, so nobody actually ever saw it. So again, keep that in mind. Would you be mad enough to want to pull off a hoax like this because of an on-air television episode? It said that Warzanek had a personal interest in hypnosis and himself was a practitioner, which would actually kind of make it hard to believe, right, that he would think that you could not implant false memories with hypnosis. If he was such a skilled hypnotist and qualified and knowledgeable about the field, why would he have thought that in the first place? But anyways, he decided to play back Blania in kind, and that he would hypnotize Wolski, implanting the story about encountering small green men in order to trap Blania in a hoax and later make a fool out of him when it was exposed. One might ask then why it was never exposed, why it never came out a hoax. Why did he pass up on this opportunity to make a fool out of what was supposedly his hated enemy? In fact, Blania went on to become quite famous and respected researcher because of this case. This was the case that put Polish ufology on the map and put Blania on the map as its lead kind of like researcher and made him a major famous figure in Polish ufology, which is quite the opposite effect of what would be intended with this hoax, which would be to humiliate him and make a fool out of him. So again, why didn't he expose it? Well, Artotowski suggests that the case simply got away from Warzanek. It took off far too quickly that he lost the opportunity to declare it a hoax. It had gotten too much attention with the local media, with the press, the village, the communist regime, law enforcement, just too fast. And he lost the opportunity to expose it. And at that point, really no hoax explanation would have been bought anyways, which is kind of true. When somebody pulls a hoax, it really doesn't matter if they later come out and admit it was a hoax. At some point, there will be people that won't accept the hoax. Calling it a hoax is the hoax. And so he never did come out and explain why it was a hoax. If in fact this happened, again, this is a hypothesis. It may not have happened. And Warzanek sort of kind of fell to the background for many years. He was still around, still doing research. And Blania continued to kind of build this case into Poland's most famous case and famous entry into the UFO record books. But it went largely uninvestigated beyond the narrative pushed by Blania for 35 years. And to be fair, there were other investigators involved with the case. There's a guy, Christoph Drost. There was a variety of other researchers, but for most of the time, it was the same kind of narrative that Blania told from his initial investigation. And it wasn't until 35 years later, when Artotowski obtained and analyzed the primary source material from Blania's investigation, did anyone take a deeper look at the case. Again, there's also no proof for this prank theory. There's no way to prove someone was, hypnotized. And again, all these characters are long dead at this point. While it seems like a logical explanation, I personally do not find it plausible that Warzanek would hold such a grudge over such a simple hypnosis experiment. And like I said, I also doubt that he had the skills to perform this hypnosis if he truly doubted that you could implant false memories. If that was the case, he went from not thinking it could be done to being an expert that pulled it off flawlessly extremely quickly. But the Warzanek family would actually issue a statement adamantly denying this. They stated that Witold had no interest in hypnosis or any ability to hypnotize anyone. They reject Artotowski's theory, calling it nothing but scandalous manipulation. We do know from Artotowski's investigation of Blania's files that the testimony of the local boy, Adam Popowek, is now in doubt. Blania had led the boy's story in a direction that would act as confirmation for Wolski's encounter. The boy's mother had tried to inform Blania the child did not develop his story until after the incident was already the talk of the town. But Blania chose to ignore this fact and continued to investigate the boy, pushing the story in a direction that confirmed Wolski's encounter. later on would no longer confirm his encounter. As an adult, he wished to escape from this innocent child a lie he told, and no longer wants anything to do with this case and will not speak about it to anyone. For Abduction, though, listening to Blania's audio recordings of the investigation made it clear he was not performing an investigation at all. He was pushing the story in a direction he had decided in advance. The entire professional and credible appearing investigation was nothing but a farce. For years, this case was considered highly credible because of the two independent witnesses, which we now know do not confirm each other's story. It was also investigated in a seemingly above-board manner by qualified individuals like psychologists, psychiatrists, university professors, with various psychological tests and other aspects that would seem to give the case an element of scientific credibility. Abduction concludes that Blania, however, did not conduct a thorough investigation and that the credibility of this case in his mind has been completely destroyed. Whatever really happened to Jan Wolski, it appears he truly believed his experience was real. He would, however, say, like some of the other cases I've covered recently, that he didn't think they were actually aliens. He thought they were foreigners. In fact, he thought the green skin may have been painted on or was a costume of some kind. And again, getting back to how this conflict information on this case, depending on what you read, some people will say that he was convinced the rest of his life that he had this extraterrestrial encounter. But other sources will say he never thought it was extraterrestrial, like ever. He always thought they were just foreigners, perhaps wearing they painted their skin, or they're wearing some sort of costume of some kind. But he believed his encounter was real, and he wasn't lying. But his encounter was not entirely, original. In fact, his encounter, his story was so common to kind of the UFO literature at the time. Researchers wondered how he could recite such a story in a town that only had 2 televisions. He did not have a television. He supposedly was completely unaware of flying saucers. He allegedly didn't even know what an extraterrestrial was or what the word meant. The only time he even saw a newspaper was when one of his sons bring one home and left it around. So he's telling a story that fit quite well with the UFO literature, which in many cases, that might be a sign that somebody's copying. However, in this case, because of the isolated nature of Wolski, that was just more confirmation that he was telling the truth, that he was able to tell a story so in line with the literature kind of at the time. But he had a story, and that's a photo of Wolski in the field and some other kind of old photos. This case did have a major impact on Polish geology as a whole. Like I said, it kind of is Poland's version of kind of like Roswell, not in the crash retrieval sense, but kind of in the popularity sense. And it had an impact on its wider culture. A short comic book that was the comic I featured in this presentation, titled Prisbiz, which I guess means the visitors, was drawn by a famed Polish illustrator, Grzegorz Rosinski, who created a very famous, was an illustrator and character creator of Thorgal. If you read graphic novels or European comics, Thorgal is a pretty famous comic, and he was the guy behind that. And that comic was written by Henryk Kurta, and it was published in 1978 in Relax magazine, number 27. A documentary of this was also filmed and aired shortly after the event on September 23rd. I'm not even going to try and pronounce that Polish name, but essentially it means visitors are at the threshold of mystery. And I recommend you watch this. Eyes on Cinema has a kind of poorly AI dubbed translation version of it, but you kind of get the point, and you can watch Wolski and the little boy and his wife and everybody actually talk about it at the time, which is always interesting. And there was additional documentaries that would air in the 80s and the 90s as well. Wolski would end up speaking about his encounter in 1985 at the Ufological Congress held in nearby Lublin. And Zbigniew Blanio was there as well. I believe Witold Wrożanek was there as well. And on October 15th, 2005, a monument commemorating the alleged landing of UFOs was unveiled in Emilcin by the Nautilus Foundation, which is a Polish UFO research organization. This monument consists of a metal cube balancing on top of a platform, and on it says, on May 10th, 1978, a UFO object landed in Emilcin. The truth will surprise us, or the truth will still surprise us. And this monument is significant another way because it's actually the very first, supposedly the very first monument commemorating a UFO abduction. So I guess before the Betty and Barney Hill monument or plaque was put up, before any of these other abductions, I guess this was supposed to be the first monument put up. And a Polish artist, Hubert Cherepak, also created this cool art exhibit recreating the event. He created this kind of really cool 3D model of the craft, and he put these children in these kind of black, toe-to-head outfits and took them out to the side and did this photo set. And then he created this art exhibit where he put the photos all along the wall and has this model. And it's really cool. I like his model. He also did an exhibit involving Nazi UFOs, but they're kind of cool looking, but from an art perspective, but not real. And the village has embraced its kind of legacy as a UFO landing site. For many years, they've held these festivals and events near the monument. There's a time capsule there that was put there in 2011 that says time capsule to be opened in 3011. So put that on your calendars, guys, and 3011. You can go open that time capsule there. And in fact, they say about 2 to 3 people a day still kind of stop by the village to see it. Again, it's a small town. There's not really anything to do there, but people driving through town and foreigners still do stop by to see this monument. And you can see the monument yourself. It has a 24-hour live webcam. I've been watching these flying rods, i.e. bugs, fly in front of it, at night on a regular basis. And there is, in fact, a picture of the old Wolski home and one of the festivals. I believe that was a festival they had there in 2009. And they actually just had a festival a few weeks ago as well, one of these picnics, these ufological picnics at the site. Now, like I mentioned, this case was very similar to other cases in the UFO literature. And in fact, there was another case that happened in Poland just several months later, in Golina and Przyzniak or something like that. Now, this case happened on September 27th. The Przyzniak one happened the day before on the 26th. And now it's important to note that documentary I just showed you, that main one from 1978, aired 4 days before this Galena polling case. And as you can see, the entities are almost identical. In this case, they saw a guy was mushroom hunting out in the forest, and he saw, again, kind of a cuboid, kind of like craft, and these 2 small, kind of 5-foot tall entities with green skin and these overall outfits. And they were interested in his motorcycle. He showed him how his motorcycle worked and explained it. And they kind of went back in the craft and it kind of took off. And it looked very similar, the craft did, except it was kind of, instead of this kind of whitish opalescence, it was kind of like a bluish, whitish kind of color to it. And one of the other encounters, there was a school encounter that I mentioned the day before on the 26th that, again, it was described in much the same way. These children saw these entities. However, they described the entities with that. I told you Blania had suggested they put fake elements in the story in order to pick up copycats. And one of those was the webbed hands and this insignia kind of like on the chest or breast area of the thing, this kind of red symbol. And these children did report this red kind of symbol, which was in the documentary that had just aired a few days before. And so Blania concluded that children case with the school children was fake, but he believed this Galena case that happened the following day with the guy on a motorcycle that was out picking mushrooms was in fact a real case. Now, as far as other corroboration in Emilcin, I'll mention that on the day of the event, besides for that boy, there was not a whole lot of people that came forward to support the case. Supposedly, there was a loud kind of a thundering sound that was kind of heard, almost kind of like a sonic boom, like a vibration that they said they felt emanated from under the ground at about the same time this encounter happened. And many of those stories actually wouldn't even end up coming out until 30, 40 years later when people went and reinvestigated people. Apparently, they had told the television news crews and reporters at the time, but they did not apparently want to go on camera or their story to be told publicly. And in 2017, in fact, starting actually around in 2005, people also reported hearing a kind of a buzzing or humming or transformer sound kind of in the area. And in 2017, on November 5th, witnesses were driving down the road in the area and saw this kind of cloudy, misty-like object that has a sort of similar shape to the object that Wolski encountered. And they reported hearing a kind of a buzzing, a kind of a transformer-like sound kind of as well. Another kind of amphibian kind of frogman kind of case is this Loveland frogman case that happened on May 25th, where this guy, Robert Honeycutt, is driving in Loveland, Ohio, and he encounters these entities that, while they're not exactly like the Emilcin entities, they are described as amphibian-like, and they have that hump or lump kind of like around the neck. That hump or lump was also reported in those September encounters in Poland, and in a few other encounters that I've run across. In fact, there's another famous case also in September 1978, the Udine, Italy case, also known as the Little Oriental Airman case. That again is a small creature in a form-fitting toe-to-head kind of outfit that had these oriental features. That the skin was not, it wasn't a green entity like these Polish cases were, but the description of the beings shared a lot of kind of familiar similarities. And so that's basically what I got for the presentation. There's a lot of other various kind of weird details about this case. One involving a supposed devil stone in the area that has some sort of relation. These stones are UFO navigation beacons, and they're put on these kind of like grid lines like around Europe. And one of these stones just happens to be where Wolski's encounter was. There's another story about the TV crew that was there in 1981 was doing an experiment with a pendulum, and in front of the whole crew, this pendulum supposedly just vanished. Supposedly there's a smell of sulfur relating to his when he was in this craft. One source claims there's this acrid smell, kind of like sulfur, and that it got so bad in his clothes that for days, like, he couldn't even wear them because they smelled so bad of the smell. But again, I could only really find one source that kind of said that. So there's a lot of interesting tangents and stuff and places you could go with this case. And if there's something I didn't get to, we will have a discussion episode next week, and you can ask me, because I'm sure there's lots of things I missed. But I believe that should do it for now.